The Buddha, in his sutta on Bahiya, where he says there's just the hearing, there's just the seeing, there's just the smelling, there's just the tasting. And in just the hearing, just the seeing, just the tasting, the smelling, and the sensing, there's no one to be found there who is hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. There's just the presencing of a sight, a sound, of any kind of inner sense, a thought. These things are just occurrences, but there's no one there that they're occurring to.
Hello, Jackson.
Hello.
Excited to have you on the show again. Thank you.
I'm excited to speak with you. You were actually very participant in our discussions regarding this whole insight into no self, according to how it was being shared on Liberation Unleashed, and that my interchanges with you really brought about an amazing dropping away of the self while reading the book that you guys offered on what is it called? It was all these different cases of different people talking to the interviewer.
So there are two books. One is called Gateless Gatecrashers, that is just interviews, and the other one is called Liberation Unleashed.
Okay, so it was the gate. I think there was the
Yes.
Gatecrasher one. It was about what, 6 years ago or something, or 7 years ago. Anyway, so having just read that book, and I'm in the middle of actually reading it and kind of critiquing, the interviewer from Liberation Unleashed and the person and this, and going, well, that's kind of shallow, that's kind of this, but this is deep, this is better, yeah, and so forth. It's as though information was being downloaded into my subconscious mind that I wasn't even aware that it had relevance at another level than just my surface consciousness. I'm going, oh, it's interesting, that's not so interesting, that's good, that's this. But there was a deeper downloading of information into a deeper core level of consciousness, which was kind of like adjusting its understanding to the whole presentation of the environment and reality. And that information hadn't really been downloaded previously before into the subconscious level of the mind. And it's kind of like I'd always believed ropes were snakes. That was my traditional belief. Whenever I'd see a rope, I'd react like, oh, that's a snake, and I have to be afraid of that. And it had never been presented to me, as an analogy. It's never been presented to me before that, no, the rope is not a snake. It's just a rope. It can't bite you. You don't have to worry about it. It's as though somebody told me that. And suddenly in my subconscious mind, I thought, could that be that there really is not a snake there? It's just a rope. So I turn the lights up and I go look and I go, oh my God, it's been a rope all along. And suddenly the subconscious mind, who was entering all of this agitation and fear, stops doing that because it's now auto-corrected the error of thinking this form it was perceiving was a snake relative to conditioning on what snakes are previously. And suddenly the whole idea of snake went away and it was just a rope. But I didn't do it. It just subconsciously corrected the error of making it seem like it was a snake. So likewise, while I was reading this text, these series of texts, I didn't realize corrective information was being downloaded while I was on the surface consciousness critiquing and this and that and enjoying and so forth, that there was a deeper taking in of that information as well and was being processed. And suddenly the selfing mechanism, to where, similar to how the mind is taking a rope to be a snake by accident, my mind was taking my body, my self-image, my self-identity as being not a snake, but a self, an identity, a me, a real me. And that was being generated by the subconscious, this sense of being a real me, which was being superimposed, not upon a rope, but upon a physical body, mental processes, and this selfing feeling of being a me. And that was being superimposed subconsciously as, well, that's how it is. but suddenly it auto-corrected in the subconscious, and the subconscious, on the level of the subconscious, just stopped producing the me illusion of identity, that I am a body, that I am this and this. And it wasn't a realization. It was just a cessation. It's as
Mm-hmm.
though a movie projector was running, projecting this, and suddenly onto the movie screen, and then suddenly somebody turned the movie projector off without any explanation. The movie stopped going onto the screen. So that was the subconscious just ceased doing it. And it was a sense of shock, but it was such a sense of relief, such a deep sense of somehow a relief that was like a release of energy, that was like in the heart, kind of a contracted feeling of energy being there, that suddenly dissipated. That was my entry to this whole thing. Was that was the real first thing. Previous to it, there were like these lighter versions of an intellectual understanding and an insight. Aha, I get it. I get it.
Mm-hmm.
Who gets it? Well, the I was still there, but it was a more educated I, and it now had in its surface level processing, it understood that there wasn't really an I, but there still was an I that now got it,
Right, right.
that understood it. But in this case, there was no I to get anything. There was
Mm-hmm.
just an absence of all selfing and reference to a me. And there's just what was and what is, with this expansive sense right at the heart area, heart chakra, of this expansive. There's no words to put onto it because it was non-conceptual, but there was an absolute absence of a center point to where all of these events are occurring to and
Mm-hmm.
perceptions are occurring to. It was just absent of that. And it was in a sense, it was shocking, but there wasn't anyone there to be shocked. And at the same time, I thought of my son and his situation where he was having some difficult situations in life. And I was thinking from his viewpoint that there's also no one here, there's no one there. And if only that could happen there, all of these difficulties would be resolved because they belonged to this
Mm-hmm.
psychological self, that his subconscious mind. So it wasn't just a benefit for me. I saw how it applied to everybody. And there is
Right.
no everybody. There's bodies, there's mental activities, there's brain activity, but there's nobody in there. There's no ghost in the machine that's the perceiver. But the subconscious mind is projecting a
Mm-hmm.
ghost like, like in a dream at night.
Yeah.
In the dream, it seems you're a real person and there's a real tiger, and it doesn't feel less real than it does in the daytime. You feel like me, and you're looking out your eyes and you see a tiger and you think the tiger is causing you to feel fear, not seeing that the subconscious mind is not only producing you and the tiger in the dream, but that it's one single projection, but you still have that feeling in the dream of being a me looking at a tiger with an independent consciousness that has autonomy and free will, not realizing that that's how the subconscious mind is projecting the
Mm-hmm.
self in the dream to experience it, as though it is an individual entity truly being confronted by a separate tiger that's making it feel fear. So
Mm-hmm.
that whole thing just sort of dropped away in seeing that. And then came the realizations afterwards that that's the same in the daytime. The subconscious mind is projecting an illusory self, just like in a dream, and it's confronting an outside world um, that is independent from it, which it is perceiving as a sense of self, a sense of me. How is that different than the dream self? And I looked at that and I looked at that, and then suddenly that it dawned, wow, there's no self there at all. It's all being projected by the subconscious mind. The biocomputer, through evolution, has learned to develop this captain of the ship that's kind of like running these prefrontal activities of the executive brain, the decision maker and the fine tuner of reality and the calculator and all of that. And all of that has been lumped into being called the captain of the ship. And the
Right.
captain of the ship is the one who feels like me, but it's just a projection. It's just a subconscious projection. There's no self there in the body or in the mind or in consciousness at all. It's just like in the dream. And that's where it really kind of came out of the level of being just a cessation from reading the book that you guys put out to where it is implications in life in general, and then taking it to see the analogy of how the dreaming mind is projecting the self, which is confronting a tiger or it's in landscape, that's all being projected by one single dreaming mind like a movie projector. And you, the self in the movie, the dream, is simply a projection of subconscious brain activity.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing that's exactly what's happening when you wake up in the morning. The subconscious mind ceases projecting the self you were in the dream, but it then starts projecting the self you are in the daytime consciousness. And everything you're seeing around you, you're not seeing the external world. You can't. All you're seeing is a representation that the brain is making from the input of the five senses, and it's like an inner movie occurring in your head. So how is this different than the dream? Not to say there isn't a real external world out there, because that's giving the information that's coming into the five senses. But it's the same mechanism that's producing the self in the dream who's terrified, because the subconscious mind is projecting it to be terrified, not that the tiger made it afraid. And that's the same thing that's happening in the daytime consciousness. The conclusion was, that's it. There's nothing further to seek or want to learn, or to some notion of non-duality, or to take it to the second step or to the next step, or it's like, well, what comes next, Jackson? It's like, for whom? When the seeker dissolves and the practitioner dissolves, is seen by the subconscious mind as being just a fictional entity it created as a captain of the biological ship, and it's not real. The whole work, the structure of a seeker seeking immortality or freedom from suffering, it all just goes away. So
Powerful.
that's the whole story. But that was very much contingent on my contacts with you directly in our emails.
And as you said, but it slipped so quickly, is that you had a look, you looked. That was it. This is the most important point. It's just taking a look for yourself, isn't it?
But it wasn't taking a look by an entity who's taking a look. The entity that would be taking a look disappeared.
Yeah, but the look was taken. The look was taken.
It was more like, I frame it differently. You're framing it in a way that, is personal to how you're experiencing it. My experience was different than that, and I've tried to share this. I'm not saying that one is better than the other. It's just how it unfolds. But that it wasn't like I had seen something or I had a realization that there was no self, but the I that would have the realization there is a self or there is no self, that I disappeared.
Yes.
So there's no one there. But it wasn't seen by what was it seen? You see, that then becomes the next quandary when the selfing comes back again, and you go, well, who just saw that? Since there's no one there who could see it, what is the entity or the consciousness or the awareness which became aware of that? And you kind of go through the same process, and each time it reduces down to nothing. There's no one there. Everything's happening, but it's not happening to anyone on any level of consciousness. So that's how it's processed here.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. It's like colors are here, but the question who is seeing colors is no longer there. Sounds are here, right. Conversation is here, but the question of who is no longer there.
Correct. But I then, because of the way my mind works, I took it further, particularly in my retreats, trying to share this. And conversations went in a way to where, like, but we know in neuroscience, and I know now and understand it fully and from experience as well, that there's no colors in the outside world. There's simply frequencies of the electromagnetic field, which have no color and they have no shape. And that's what photons are entering into the retina, are simply vibrational frequencies of this electromagnetic field, which we call light. So light doesn't have colors. It doesn't have brightness. That's not a quality. It's completely invisible, and we know that. We know light is invisible. It's not bright, it's not colorful. But when it comes into the retina and gets processed through the optic nerve to the back of the brain, the occipital cortex, it takes these different manifestations of the impact of the electromagnetic field photons hitting the retina and converts them into pro-survival, pro-reproduction colors and forms and sounds, because there's no sounds in the external world either. There's just vibration of air molecules, which have no sound. The sound is created the same way in the brain. So we create this inner world of colors and sounds and flavors and tastes, but none of those exist in the external world. They're completely different than how they are represented by our brain. So we've got this movie taking place, and everything we're looking around seeing now is simply a movie that's taking place in our head, being generated by our brain. And everything you're seeing, nothing is made of atoms or molecules, just like nothing in your dream is made of atoms and molecules and so forth. It's not real stuff. Well, everything you're seeing is not real stuff, but what it's representing is the real stuff. That's the
Right.
external world that's entering through the five senses. And so I find myself, in this world, which the brain is producing, but then also the brain isn't just producing this experience of a 3D world and its spatial dimensions and all of that, but it's also projecting the sense of there being a self in the middle sitting in the movie theater watching it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There's no self there who's watching the movie. So when that drops away, the movie drops away, the self drops away, and it becomes this no subject, no object, entityness, no entityness of just, you can't put words on it, because if there's words being put on it, it's back into the dream again. And it's
Right.
it's like
Yeah.
you just fell asleep again, right? It's like, oh, okay, now I put words on it and put it in this structure, in these categories.
Mm-hmm.
So it really became, in my teaching retreats, it really became a process of going to the second step of talking about, okay, great, now it's understood, so to speak, that there's no self and the self drops away, and the subconscious mind of the human organism now knows there's no snakes, there's just ropes. And so that subconscious mind knows there's no self, there's no personal investment in any of this, because there's no personal self to be invested in any of it. But then there's the question, well, okay, well, what is all this stuff around me? What are all these things going on? So I would go into trying to explain, as I did the neuroscience, of that there's no sounds, there's no colors, there's no shapes, there's no brightness. All of that's being generated by the brain as well as the one who's watching it. So I would take both sides. We say in Buddhism, twofold emptiness. You realize the empty nature of the self, that you can't find it. And you notice the empty nature of what you think is the real world is just like a brain hallucination, but it's so closely correlated to the real external world, which is made of atoms and molecules and quantum fields and so forth. It's not all just like a dream, but you're in the brain's dream. But there is an external world which is correlating with the brain's dream. That's why when you go to grab a real glass of water, you don't miss it.
Right. And
There is a
somebody
real
else can
glass
come and take the same glass of water.
Exactly. And you don't miss it because it's so tightly correlating the actual external world with this dream imagery. What you're seeing is an image in your mind of a glass that the brain is producing, but it's like it's overlaid on the real glass of water that anybody in the room could see and could grab. And it's like that subtlety of starting to see the whole thing that way, kind of, there's no real description for it, because it's like a cessation of all the descriptions as well, all of the thought constructions, the building up of a world of my thought constructions of how I thought it was or how I think it is. And it's not what people are looking for. People are looking for something different. They're looking for, I want to discover this inner me as a soul, it's a self, and it's burdened by its own conceptual constructions, its feelings, its negative karma. And how do I clean that negative karma off of me, this permanent self that's always reincarnating? How do I become free of all of my suffering, but as me?
Mm-hmm. True.
So the me isn't gone, but it's a cleaned me. I took it to the cleaners and I got it back, and it's clean. It's happy all the time. It's in a blissful state all the time. That's what everybody's looking for.
Yes.
And when they look
Yes.
inside for it, they don't find it because there isn't one there.
Mm.
So
Yeah, but everyone is looking for happiness. That's just the simplest way to put it. Everyone wants to feel comfortable or wants to feel good. And that's how the show goes.
and that's how the biology, because I
Yeah.
really stress this on evolutionary biology, because that's really tangible. The other ideas of this philosophy and this religion, this mystical system, and this, they all disagree with each other and they say the other one's wrong. We are the only ones that have it. So I just try to stay with something that I can work with and be comfortable and say, okay, at this stage of consciousness, I can say it's true. If I take LSD, I'm going to have an experience. That's going to be for sure. And it's not just in my mind that's the idea that because I'm thinking I'm taking a pill of LSD is why it's occurring. Because somebody could surreptitiously put LSD in my
Right.
coffee while
Right.
I'm looking away, and I'm still going to have the same LSD trip.
Right.
Which means that the neurons in the brain are being affected and transformed in the neurotransmitters from the effect of LSD connecting up with those neurotransmitter connections, which we now know in normal brain science. I like that level to where we can see the cause and effect and really have an argument with, well, how could it not be this way? You're going to have to make up some really good arguments. Like, for instance, in the old days where people used to believe that, I mean, old days, and still in areas of Africa and the Amazon where they believed that rain was coming because the gods were crying, they were sad about something, or thunder was the gods fighting, or that earthquakes were the earth god was unhappy with something that was taking place. And slowly over time, science began to prove to say, hey, wait a second, rain is not because there's gods crying, but rain is because a certain amount of condensation is rising and evaporating, and it gets to a certain level to where it can't hold itself any longer and it drops back down. And, when all of these kinds of things, like the earth isn't flat, the earth isn't the center of the universe, and all of these things start to come out through science, it's like, well, no, at first, no, everybody would go, oh, no, that's ridiculous. We know otherwise. We know it's the rain god. We know this. So it's very hard to let go of these things that have been ingrained. So this notion of self and a real world that we're experiencing, and all of this is very ingrained in how we think. And so the evolution is, it's almost like we're fighting against the evolution, because evolution generated this captain of the ship, this feeling of me, this emotional feeling of I am. That's all driven by evolution of more and more development of the intellectual capacities of the prefrontal cortex. And as those become more and more active, as you can see on an MRI, there's a process taking place in the person's consciousness. What are you thinking about? And it'll be some more complex thing, where another part of the brain, if they're thinking about some kind of sexual adventure or something like that, another part of the brain will light up more in the area of what I call the reptilian brain, where it's more of the animal functioning. And you can trace these things. They're so tightly correlated, you can't really argue with it. And so I don't know, I'm sure you get as well, these individual seekers who have no interest in any of that. To them, it's all, that's the make-believe, is what neuroscience is saying, is the make-believe. But the truth is, I'm an individual soul. I've got karma, and I've got all of these things, and I want to be happy. Not that the desire for happiness is biological in nature, because if a person's happy, they're surviving better. And so the goal of the organism is to always find things that produce happiness and pleasantness, because then you're rewarded with endorphins, the hormones, and the serotonin and the dopamine that make you feel happy.
Right.
Being happy is just a reaction of the chemicals in the brain. It's not like something is this feeling of happiness that's independent of the brain chemicals. This is very difficult to have a discussion with. I get people from India, particularly, who are very ingrained into the the fabric of the brainwashing of the soul and the higher self, and it's this and it's this and it's this, and that's okay, but it's just not true. If you really look into it, you'll slowly peel that away, and what you're left with is something completely different. And the only thing I want to add in here, Ilona, is that when you peel away all of the bullshit, there's a presence of awareness that remains. And it has no me attached to it. It has no functioning or desire for happiness or sadness. It's just like a mirror, and it's experiencing whatever is occurring. It has no preferences. It has no interests. It has no resistance. It's just an unbounded presence. And that presence, in the pointing out, that presence can be pointed out even in the middle of this dreaming to, well, what's present? What's aware of this moment right now? That's the fundamental nature. But it's so clustered in with the brain activity of the stories and all of this feeling of self. It can be like you said in that thing, there's like a glimmer, a momentary, oh, that's the nature. That's the true nature. Oh, but then it goes back into the darkness again. So it kind of seems that this is the relevance of what you're doing. It seems that if you don't, in trying to help humans, so to speak, become free of their suffering, how on whatever level is true, if you don't address the fantasy aspect of the selfing, like a child learning that there's no Santa Claus. I mean, it's difficult sometimes for children to accept that. And so this message is also very difficult, unwanted. Nobody wants to hear about this, because until they get to the, the end of the story. But it's like, well, the end of the story is, you're just this vast field of awareness that, yeah, there's kind of a blissful quality to it that's naturally an aspect of its nature. But what do you mean? It doesn't do anything? I mean, like, what about purpose? What about, go on. It's like, it's kind of hopeless to do that type of pointing out, which can be done and is done in Dzogchen, where you point out this primeval consciousness that isn't conditioned by any me or self or thoughts or anything. But it's like it's a flash and it's gone. It's a flash and it's gone. And it's not going to get better by more flashes. What's going to get better is by re-educating the subconscious mind that's producing the belief that the rope is the snake, the subconscious mind that's dreaming the sense of there being a self in waking consciousness, that's a real self having real experiences that feels like me. If that isn't reprogrammed into the subconscious mind, a person's going to be in a worse state where they're trying to grasp this thing that was pointed out. Now they've got a double samsara. They've got the samsara of their normal life, and now they've got the samsara of trying to find and capture and hold on to this pointed out consciousness that feels good, but it only lasts for a second. So you got to do the whole thing. Otherwise, I mean, you got to do the whole thing in terms of reducing the suffering of humans. You don't have to in the big picture, because when the brain stops, there's just this awareness. There's just this consciousness. So it didn't get better because you did the work. When the brain stops functioning, there's no one there that leaves the body or so forth. There's just this true state of consciousness that's always been there. It never changes, like the movie screen. All the movies play on the movie screen, and the movie screen never changes. It's like that. But it's not very attractive to people until, I guess, it gets further along. And then there's no one for it to be attractive to.
Yeah, what a mess this human existence. I mean, did the evolution go wrong?
I don't think it went wrong. I think that it's just evolution. It's like the human being is a monkey. Okay, that's all it is. It's a monkey with a more advanced forebrain. We are the genetic makeup of every cell in our body. Every cell in our body is 98.4% the same as in a gorilla or a chimpanzee. 98%.
I want my tail.
It's less than 2% difference, which is right here.
Yeah.
And in the default mode network aspect areas of the brain, where these interconnect and create this selfing feeling. And that's it. So, I think we're doing pretty good for monkeys. I mean, we're putting rockets on Mars. I mean, imagine monkeys doing that. Well, that's us. We're that one. We're those. Oh yeah, could you imagine monkeys doing that? Yeah, that's what we are. We are those monkeys doing that. And so, it's like, there's a limited capacity to be able to figure, these big problems out for the universe. I mean, this biocomputer has just, so much capacity. It's like, computers 30, 40 years ago, they could only handle so many computations. And now on your iPhone, they can do 10 times that of the biggest computers that existed 40 years ago. And it's just on a single chip. So, I mean, that's pretty amazing for these monkeys. So in that regard, if you take yourself, your life is the life of a monkey with an advanced brain, and kind of accept that's the human element of your life. And yeah, it can get better, it can get worse, and you can become less disposed to the evolutionary developments that were very vital, at our stage of the captain of the ship, which caused us to survive better and sort of to move away from the regular monkeys to being able to develop through this sense of self. Me, I'm the only one that counts. The survival of me and my reproduction and my children and my things. That took us a long, long way to being able to rise above all of the other monkeys and animals and to take our place on the top of the food chain and to be able to do that. But like you just said, has evolution gone wrong? Maybe now it's time for the evolution to realize somebody like a Trump or any narcissist or anyone like that is where that type of egoic selfing about me gets too extreme in situations where that's all that's seen is the feeling of me. That would explain criminals, that would explain rapists, that would explain all kinds of warmongers, people like Putin, people like Trump, and all of these people like us who have these moments as well. That's coming from that inner captain of the ship, the me, the self, that's so strong. But we can mitigate that, and it's not just through. It really doesn't work. I mean, you can do a pointing out, and somebody can have an and I've been doing that for many years now with people, and they do have an but that goes away. It may not come back for another 2 years or whatever, but it doesn't really change the real nature of the suffering of their life. But if people sit and do meditation, like in Japanese zazen, to where you're just staying present in the moment, particularly if you've had one of those wow moments as kind of a reference point, and you let go of the thinking process and you become an observer of thoughts instead of an engager in thoughts, and you're observing these activities of the mind and even the feeling of me as an activity of the mind, there starts to become a natural separation between all of the mind's activities, emotional states, and all of the feelings, and they're just being observed. And then there's this observer that's just observing them, even the observation of the feeling of me being the observer. The me even becomes an object. And then suddenly there's this kind of dropping away of the selfing, a dropping away of the mental constructions. And there's just this pure consciousness. So in Soto Zen, that's kind of like the idea of what you're doing. And what we know now from brain studies, brain scan studies, when people are in that state, of everything self dropped away. The mental constructions have dropped away. They're not dreaming in that moment. They're just in this clear awareness. The default mode network part of the brain is inactive. Mm-hmm. And we notice also the default mode network of the brain is identically inactive when somebody takes and they're at a stage of LSD or psilocybin, and they're describing to the researcher this sense of self has dropped away. In that moment, it will show that the default mode network in the brain has become inactive because there's no blood flow going to it. So we're able to narrow down neurologically what's producing the selfing. It's not demons. It's not inner karmic propensities. It's not all that bullshit. It's just activity of the neurons. And when it can be brought down like that, it made that clear. The correlations are that clear. We can see the path. We can see the path for humans to become free of that evolutionary mistake of the activity of the DMN, which is default mode network, which is producing this strong sense of selfing. And when somebody is threatened, threatened, they will have a hyperactivity in the default mode network. So I mean, it's not like this is really that esoteric. It's very tightly correlated to neuroscience, and neuroscience won't get you an explanation for what this ground awareness is that becomes exposed when the selfing and the mental activity ceases. There is a revealed consciousness there, which neuroscience will say, well, since everything else is emergent from the brain, the consciousness, this pure awareness, must also be an emergent property of the brain. But they can't correlate that. There's no correlation for that because they won't find the correlation, and that's the whole idea of the hard problem of consciousness. There's no correlation there, and there's no evolutionary reason for there to be this kind of consciousness there. If everything is driven by the dynamics of survival, and the brain functions and the body functions for efficiency, you can't have a function that isn't efficient because it wouldn't have evolved that way. It would have dropped off. And so for humans to have this emergent property of consciousness being a part of evolution, that's the other thing that's a difficult problem for them, because well, why is there this property of selfing, this feeling of me as a separate individual? How does that have value? And that's where you get into it. So it's not really a bad story. It's not really a nihilism to where it's just the material story is true, and when you're dead, you're dead. No, it's not like that. There's more to the story, but you don't get to that part of the story until the first part of the story seems to get cleared away. You can get glimpses of it, but they're pretty much useless.
Interesting.
And what is your experience? Where are you today? I'm really curious in terms of how you've evolved in the way you teach, or the way you point out, or the way you yourself working with your own body, mind, and so forth, how you are living yourself with your attentiveness to your nature or not.
That's a huge question. Well, okay, let's see. Well, let's see that we are nature. Nature, like it's nature that processes that are going on, laws of nature. And everything is nature. The thoughts, feelings, sensations, everything is nature at play. And it doesn't matter which word we can use. We can use life or beingness or stillness or God, whichever, doesn't matter. There's something here that is. And whatever is coming up is just an invitation to look at it, to give it attention, because there is this attention, or this electricity, or this power of seeing, looking. And that power is that opens everything up. So our human experience, my human experience every day is just being moment by moment here. I'm here. Things come and go. Whatever is arising, staying and going. I'm not doing that. I'm here. And yeah, uncomfortable feeling comes in. It's like, okay, yeah, I can feel that. This is here. This is the reality of the moment. I don't need to fight it. I don't need to even analyze it. I'm just here. And this is free to come and go.
When you say that, I want to go with you here, because I consider you very insightful. So when you say, I just go with it, what do you mean by I just go with it? What is that? Is it just a way of expressing in language?
Yeah.
Or is there some sense that there's an I that says, I'm just going to go with it?
It's just the way that language is working. We can talk without the I. It will sound a little bit weird. Okay. But yeah, I can use word I, knowing that there is no entity running the show here. There is this openness and things that arise. It's not separate. So there is no I sitting in here meeting what is arising. There is just meeting what is arising. Meeting in a way with attention, like being attentive to it, being aware of it, knowing it, like holding that in knowing or in consciousness.
So
it's really not so much about
I'm not
stories, but it's just what is
right.
here right now.
I'm not challenging you, but I'm
Fine. You can challenge me.
probing to understand your perspective more clearly, because it's been so fruitful for me in the past to understand your perspective. So taking what you just shared, and let's say you're walking in the dark now. This one could be an analogy similar, but we'll just use the simple one. You're walking in the dark and there's a rope on the ground, but to you, you're in India where there's a lot of cobras, and you think for a moment that could be a dangerous snake. And then you see a little bit of the light coming through, and then you start to wonder, well, maybe that's just a rope, but you're not sure, so you keep your distance. And then finally you decide, oh, that's not a snake, that's a rope. For you, as the way you just described your situation, what was it that saw that it was at first a snake, and then it saw that it isn't a snake, and then it said, oh, that's better. Now I'm not afraid because I see now it's not a snake. That whole narrative and that feeling that there's a decider who decided that's not a snake. What was that process? Since there's no I, since there's no self, what is that? What's taking place there? Who or what is engaging in the analysis of the perception and deciding whether that's a snake or a rope, and then coming to the conclusion and the relaxation. Ah, yes, I see. It was just a rope all along. What is that for you looking at this and then saying, that's interesting. Let's see. How do I look at that? Or how would you describe what that is?
I don't know how to describe. There is no fear. There is openness. And if it's a shit moment, it's a shit moment. I'm not arguing with it. If I feel,
but I mean, what is there?
There is no arguing with it. There is no.
Okay, so I'm just trying to see.
There's no confusion. Basically, if it's a rope and a snake, that is gone. That is off.
Is there some? Okay, get it. Well, I like that. So if there's the perception of the rope, which your mind is contemplating, wow, that's a snake, and then it's seen because the lighting changes and you see that it's a rope, and is there a thought that says, I see, it's not a rope?
No. Just so whatever is here is okay.
Okay, so then if there's no self as a me seeing that it is or it isn't a snake, is it that, if you agree, I don't know if you do or not, it's personal, I guess, or not personal, that there's this background awareness, which we're talking about, which becomes exposed? Is it that background awareness which is seeing, oh, that's not a snake, and it says, oh, yeah, well, that's good, we can relax now? Or is it activity in the brain which is assessing biologically what's in front of it as it's walking along, determining, is that a friend, is that a family member, oh, is that a rope, is that a snake, is that a car driving at me, is that just brain activity, or is that somehow this background having its own inner conversation?
Yeah, I don't think about these things.
Well, of course you don't, because there's no thinker. So my point is that if you're having, I just am interested in how you address this when you're working with people. And maybe some kind of question similar to this would come up from their perspective, how you would address it as a pointing out opportunity to where you would say something like, yeah, but who is it that's afraid of the snake? And who is it that's relieved when it's seen it's just a rope? Who is that one that says, oh, I thought it was a snake and I felt fear, and then, oh, I had a release of fear and felt relaxed once I saw it wasn't a snake, you would be using that, I would be using it as a thing of saying, to go further from, they have an intellectual understanding of there is no self, but they just describe to you the activity of the self. The
Mhm.
self is saying, oh, yes, not just for the use of language. I mean, we're not being, picky on the words, but they're actually saying, I saw this, I see this. It would seem like there's an opportunity to say, well, who is that I who just saw it was a snake, and that I who felt fear, and that I who was released? What is that I? That to me is a great pointing out opportunity, that the ego is still alive and strong and functioning. The captain of the ship is still in charge, and it's all chugging right along. But the person has this, also the brain is producing this idea that I've seen through the illusion of the self. And that's now like a new narrative, right?
Yes, yes. But there's also this ability to say, let's say I'm just going to say one word and you see what happens, and you just listen. Listen to external sounds. What happens in you when you hear this?
I think the brain listens up.
Yeah, right, right. There's this, okay, that's unexpected. Let's hear it. What's going on? So I'm not working with like a person. I'm working with energy. Okay. So if I
Okay,
say,
good.
listen, and then something opens up, and then like, what's here? Can that be as it is? Everything can be as it is. If there is some resistance to that or argument with that, then I look at what is they arguing with that. Then it's just another energy pattern, another conditioned belief or something going on. And then I look at that. It's like zooming in and zooming in and zooming in and zooming in and zooming in until the space opens.
And then?
And then everything can be as it is. Just it.
Okay. So would you find, it sounds like you do that. It sounds like you share that. And does that
And
produce
that
any
works
kind of,
like entrainment. Brain can be
okay,
entrained
sure.
by
Uh-huh.
sounds, by frequency. So it
Sure.
works like entrainment. And I'm
Okay.
here, right? I'm just here. I'm not having any expectations or any, how to say, agenda. I'm here, right? There's somebody here comes in and we have a conversation. And their system, the biological system, the neurological system is picking up on the signal and is getting entrained. And it sees it's fascinating because sometimes I sit with people and they suddenly start seeing thoughts as thoughts, feelings as feelings, and I don't say anything. But everything in the system calms down because it gets to entrained to the signal here. And in that way, there is some kind of falling away of stuff that is no longer working.
So it'd be kind of like where the Buddha in his sutta on Bahiya, where he says there's just the hearing, there's just the seeing, there's just the smelling, there's just the tasting. And in just the hearing, just the seeing, just the tasting, the smelling, and the sensing, there's no one to be found there who is hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling. There's just the presencing of a sight, a sound, of any kind of inner sense, a thought. These things are just occurrences, but there's no one there that they're occurring to. So the Buddha
Yeah,
made clear in that sutta that it's just the hearing and the seeing. That seems to be like what you're saying. You're
yeah.
just here, and this is what's happening. But it's the idea of there being the necessity of there being someone there that the hearing and seeing is happening to as an entity. That's completely superfluous. It's not necessary, and
Right.
it isn't real. It's not actually there. But the brain puts in this perceiver, the middleman. I call him the middleman. He's the one who's kind of intercepting the perceptions and so forth, and then judging. And well, that's this sound. It means this. It's a bird. And then
Yeah.
there's the construction, and then there's the labeling and all of that. But the Buddha is saying no, which I think is what you're saying, is you just stay with what's seen, what's heard, and so forth, without getting into the conceptualization of, well, what does that mean to me, and where does that, do I like that sound? Do I like what's there? Do I
Mm-hmm.
like, I don't even like what she's wearing today. Well, I do. I really love what she's wearing today. What is she getting at talking to me? Well, it's like none of that. It's just like the hearing, the sound, the words, and so forth. So it's something like that, I think, right?
Yes, and even that judgment that comes in can be seen.
And that's just another
Everything can be
event.
seen. It's just, I'm here. Everything, whatever is coming and going, it's not me, it's not mine. It's just what is showing up.
Yeah. Well,
But that word I'm here is just the same way to say presence or being awareness. So
even the thought,
this.
or even the thought, I am here as me, is the same as the sound of rain falling outside.
Yeah.
It doesn't belong to anyone. Yeah.
And somehow,
See,
through this process, life gets better. I mean, this human life does get better because the noise is being canceled. There is more space for joy.
Okay. So your approach, which sounds completely valid to me, is more through, it's kind of like they do in Japanese Zen, to where you're being more in the moment without really participating as a imaginary member of someone who is there, but you're just in the moment with what's happening. Whereas where I'm currently at, I mean, it doesn't remain a static view. It's like the flavor of the week. But it truly is. I mean, it's subtle, but I mean, it's like, is it Samkhya, or is it Advaita Vedanta, or a little bit of Dzogchen, or it's this or this, which it's kind of like they're in some kind of competitive thing to try to
tuning in.
It's like
looking for signal.
perfectly. Like I'll get one like I'm having a Sufi week, It's like, oh yeah, it's my Sufi cognitions and awarenesses I had, and that'll kind of flavor my text and what I'm writing for a while, and then a thought comes, like it's like, but wait, what about blah blah blah? And I go, oh yeah, okay, back to Dzogchen. Let's see how this. But these are like subtle points. These aren't like the big story. These are like, can you really market in a spiritual sense? Can you really get behind Vedanta, or whether it's Dzogchen, or whether it's Mahamudra, or whether it's Zen, whether it's Taoist yoga, whether it's Kundalini yoga, or Sufism, or Kabbalah? Like, is there any one of those you can just get in and you sign up and you've got your membership card and you just market the hell out of that particular view because that view is flawless? I haven't found any of those. I found flaws, so to speak, to where one will say one and the other will say the opposite. And it's like, well, they can't both be right. They both can't be right. One says there's no reincarnation. The other says there is, and there's this and this. And then my own personal experiences say, oh, no, they're both wrong. But these are all very subtle points. And I think it's like there's kind of an inner struggle to be able to say, here's the bottom line. This is where I think you're going to find the greatest benefit if you follow this particular path. But it's dangerous because they have errors, like seeing a rope to be a snake. There's these snakes in these systems, to where, for instance, in the Tibetan system called Mahamudra, where you're really becoming one with the ocean of reality and everything is just waves of these reality. And you say, well, where is the wave that I'm experiencing now as my world, as the wave that's evolving out of my consciousness as my world? Why is my neighbor next door having the same wave? I'm watching the TV show of the football game, and I find out later they were watching the exact same game and having the same experience. But like, for instance, Mahamudra, they'll say that everything you're seeing is your own personal karmic vision. It's arising from your own personal consciousness. Well, how did my neighbor come up with the exact same karmic consciousness? Oh, that's because you're close to each other. And then they get into all these things like, oh my God,
Yeah. For me, the answer to all these questions is I don't know.
Right. So it's like I created this group called Way of Light in my in my multiple groups that I have on Facebook. And that came out of that frustration of saying, I can't say this or I can't say that. And that's where my book came from. It's like people say, well, Jackson, 20 years ago, they say, Jackson, do you have a book you'd recommend? And I go, not exactly. I mean, there's some good parts to Eckhart Tolle's book, his first book, and there's some good points here, but you got to, watch out for this thing about the pain body. I don't believe there's a pain body, and you find these different things like that. So then this book just downloaded. I didn't think about each of the chapters. My book, The Natural Bliss of Being. I didn't think it just downloaded. I would be walking with my wife, and I'd say, I've got the next chapter. And I'd come home and I would just sit and type. I didn't think about anything. I just would type because it was a download, like I was being channeled, not from some other being or something, but from some kind of creative source that was able to, expand this. And then I would read what I just wrote, and all I would do is change some of the punctuation and the grammar. And I would surprise myself when I would read it later. I go, this is really good. I couldn't have written it. And so that's been kind of the struggle too, is like, how do you share this information and what is good to leave in and what is good to leave out if there's any kind of dynamic purpose arising? And here it is. It's very strong. It's very strong to share. I mean, it's for you too, or else you wouldn't be doing what you're doing. You'd be out playing, swimming, or doing whatever you're doing. But there's this drive to somehow be a conduit where things are flowing through because it feels good.
Right.
It gives my endorphins excitement. This is like somebody could say, oh, you spoke to Ilona today and so forth. How did that go? It was great. Well, what was so great about it? My endorphins were energized. It's like that's my brain was producing the good feeling chemicals and the hormones and so forth from speaking to Ilona. Yeah. It's like it's like people couldn't understand, that this is it for me. This is the high point. Or speaking to a student who emails me a question on Facebook. I do this all day long, by the way, and I'll get some good questions once in a while where somebody's really engaged, and it's like, wow, it's all worth it. It's all worth it. They'll have an insight or something like this, and it's like, that's the dynamic. And somebody will say, well, Jackson, if you have no self and so forth, why are you doing this? Why are you on Facebook all the time writing these texts and so forth? And I say, I don't know.
Oh, but then we come back to this people wanting to be happy and enjoy life. And this is it. And this is it.
And it just flows that way. It's kind of like, well, I hate to use the example, but it's kind of like it's. I won't even use the example. I was gonna say it's like a rapist having this urge that they have to do this. They can't control that urge. It's kind of similar. You know what I mean? It's like you've got this urge to be of benefit, and you can't stop it. And you can't stop it, but it produces other people to be happy too. It's like I used to say,
it's contagious.
Exactly. I used to say, because I would come to this insight myself, I would say, the whole point, which is validating what you said, the whole point is to have fun. That's the whole point. And I put that out into my Buddhist groups and stuff. They go, oh, what do you mean to have fun? That's ego and so forth. And so I say, well, maybe, but it still feels good, and it seems innocent, and people seem to be having a good time, and it's like, yeah, but it's just what's happening, and it feels good. And then I had to add another line to that. The purpose of life is to have fun, but you can't really have fun unless everyone else is having fun with you.
Nice.
Because that's the real fun. Because if you're having fun and everybody's suffering all around you, it's like it drains your fun, because you're empathetic and you have compassion. You go, well, maybe I could help them to have fun too. So I think that's what we're doing.
Yes, sweet. Okay, and let's finish with that.
Perfect.
Great.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great.
So whoever listened, I hope you had fun.
Yeah, I think this is also hopefully something that can be useful for other teachers that are working through these things and have the insights that you shared, because they're very masterly.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Jackson.
Take care. Have a great day.
Too.
Great
You
weekend.
too. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.